back with us here on episode 602 is the man, Jay Dyer. His website is Jay's Analysis, no apostrophe, please. And it's grown to become one of the premier film and philosophy sites on the net, showcasing the talents of Jay Dyer, whose graduate work focused on the interplay of film, geopolitics, espionage, and psychological warfare. He is a public speaker, a lecturer, a comedian, and author of the popular title Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, as well as the host of Jay's Analysis podcast, Esoteric Hollywood. Jay's also a regular contributor to 21st Century Wire, Soul of the East, and the Espionage History Archive, broaching subjects as wide as satire, metaphysics, film analysis, theology, geopolitics, literature, and history, as well as interviewing numerous prominent figures. Jay's authored hundreds of articles already read by millions in just the past few years. Again, take a look at jaysanalysis.com, and you will enjoy it. Hey, Jay, good to have you back with us. How you doing?
Thanks, John. Glad to be here. It's my pleasure. I enjoy the Caravan to Midnight immensely.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. I'm looking at your website right now, and there's that strange, junky-looking girl on there. If you'll excuse the expression, I hope that's not somebody you like, but she does look a little spaced out there. And the
you talking about up at the top?
Yeah.
Everybody comments on that. I had somebody said, "Why do you have a tranny on your website?" I said, "It's not a tranny. It's like one of the most beautiful women alive. It's Mila Jovovich." So I just thought that was a cool picture.
Yeah. Well, it's an arresting visual, shall we say? But this cannibal culture, neon demon.
Yeah.
I read your analysis of it, and I don't know, where are we now? It looks to me like all these things that were foisted on us, pretty much. Look, let me start here. Just for the heck of it, I decided to reach back into the annals of television history, and I pulled up some old, they run them on YouTube, T.H.E. Cat, Thomas Hewitt Edward Cat, and this guy's he's a real stud, and he runs around helping people. He's like an acrobat and everything else, and he solves problems for people. And I'm looking at the costumes that the dresses that some of the women were wearing, and I thought, how did I miss this when I was a child? You can see everything except her actual skin. It was really amazing how racy it was. And then, but now we see what's happening now with, it's like CSI, whichever city it is, CSI Detroit, CSI Pittsburgh, CSI Wichita, Kansas, whatever. It's like Sam Peckinpah stuff on steroids. Sam Peckinpah, as you may remember, folks, was he was like the first one to put violence into slow motion, people flying through the air, and bullets going in slow motion through people's heads, like and then that one with James Caan, some spy deal. I can't even remember what the name of it was right now, but I'm just wondering, now with CSI, it's like, look how the bullet enters the body, goes through the liver, down through the entrails, up here through the trachea, and then out the eyeball. It's like, Jesus, is this really necessary? So, But it looks like there's been so much of it, and I may be wrong, so straighten me out if I am. It looks to me like that ship has sailed. It looks like they have actually managed to put so much disgusting crazy on the screen that people are they're just numb to it.
Yeah, well, this one was so extreme that it even got booed at the Cannes Film Festival, which I think says a lot. And that was what The Guardian reported on this film, Neon Demon. And I didn't know what I was in for. I don't like to read reviews. I don't want to get spoilers before I watch a film. But I'd seen this director, Nicholas Refn's previous films. The first one, Drive, I thought was well made, well done. The next few I didn't care for, but I thought I'd give it one last shot. But yeah, this one was just really over the top. It definitely grossed me out. It doesn't actually show a lot. A lot of it's implied, but you get enough of a picture that you. Well, I'll put it this way: somebody throws up an eyeball. So.
Oh, there you go.
Now, I mean, we've seen that kind of stuff in B-grade horror movies, I guess, for a long time. But this is different because this was supposed to be this artsy, avant-garde type film. And really, the amazing thing about it is that it shows mind control, all the tropes and themes that we've talked about in the conspiracy genre for so long are really integral parts of this film. I mean, it's at the top. You've got, even though it's not about Hollywood, it ties into Hollywood because the fashion industry obviously is intimately connected with that same world. And you have the young girl who's underage, who's brought into the industry, so to speak, and she basically gets chewed up and spit out, literally. She's chewed up and spit out because she falls under the spell of a group of witches and a kind of cannibalistic cult who ultimately, and they actually foreshadow and show this to her throughout the film. If you remember the great horror movie Wicker Man, where they're constantly showing the policeman ahead of time that he's the fool, he's the sacrifice, he's the rabbit. We find the same thing in this film, that they've been mind controlling her and showing her that she's going to be sacrificed. And so I see it not just as the story of an occultic sacrifice of some girl who's caught up in this disgusting industry, but she's also representative of how this so-called high fashion Madison Avenue social engineering tool, which is what it is, actually affects the populace and the average adolescent girl or teenage girl, right? They're traumatized with the same phenomena that the protagonist in the film is, played by Ellie Fanning.
So is there some sort of an implied upside to this sort of a presentation, to where it's, I mean, is there some moral here or not really?
No. No, you listen to interviews with the director and he makes it explicit that the film is just postmodern. It doesn't have meaning. It doesn't have objective truth. That's actually what the film is warring against, with just pure raw brutalism and what he calls just an existential experience. And so there's not, I mean, there's a kind of layer of occultic meaning that's there, but for him, according to interviews, he says no, the film just represents subjectivism. It represents you creating your own meaning, which is what we've seen for so long, coming actually out of the Pentagon. And so I'm glad you mentioned those older, 60s shows and so forth, because as I think we talked about last time when you had me on, the Pentagon has for a long time been directly connected to Hollywood. And we, in the 50s and 60s, we were told that, oh, this is to fight the Reds. We got to have these spies in Hollywood. The FBI's got to put its spies in Hollywood, including people like Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, because they're going to save us from the Reds or the Nazis or whoever. But in actual fact, when you get into the deep research of the history of the relationship between the Pentagon and Hollywood, there's a whole book on this called Operation Hollywood by different academic scholars. They point out that the long-term social engineering and propaganda was actually to move us into a stage of desensitization, toxic culture, the promotion of radical sexual alternative lifestyles, so to speak. That was all done by design, and it's the big think tanks and the foundations and the Pentagon, Rand Corporation that are all in the background of doing this. And so, yeah, you bet it's 100% design, because it's the desensitization that they're using in the films has its origins in the desensitization techniques that were used by the Pentagon for military application, for training soldiers to be more willing to shoot humans when the natural human reaction is to not want to kill another human being.
So what is this supposed to accomplish? What's this supposed to accomplish as far as the twisting of the mass mentality of the society as a whole? I mean, what is this supposed to do? Get everybody ready for the next big mass extinction, or what?
Well, the film's title, Neon Demon. I don't recommend this movie, by the way. The analysis was written because I thought, wow, I didn't know what I was getting into. So I say in my analysis, I don't recommend watching this, and I don't think what I wrote is going to entice anybody to. This is not a Streisand effect kind of thing, but really, it's a matter of making everybody into a neon demon. And the meaning of that in the film is that the younger generation, represented by the young model, who's actually underage, by the way, so there's hints at human trafficking. Keanu Reeves plays the character who runs this motel where they sort of move these girls in and out that go into either prostitution or the modeling racket. What we have here is the combination of two seemingly disconnected things: the ancient notion of the demonic, which would be exemplified in egoism, in narcissism and self-worship with neon, which is glitz, glam, 80s hair bands, right? We think about neon lighting from the 80s. So something very modern, something very vain, something very glamorous, I guess, combined with something narcissistic, ancient, primeval, and evil is the purpose of this film. And if you look at Refn's other films, he's oftentimes portraying neo-paganism or the archaic revival, or there's different terms for this idea that the return to primitivism is the existential salvation from modernity and civilization, right? So if we can just basically return to cannibalism and eating people and running around with spears and running around in our underwear and covered in mud and feces, then that's some sort of salvation and civilization. And so I just see it as an extension of the 60s revolution, decades later, which I believe, as you've had Dave McGowan on, Dave's got great books that demonstrate that the 60s counterculture was essentially promoted and given birth to by the establishment. I mean, granted, there were anti-war activists early on who were, I think, legitimate, but the whole purpose of the decadence and the excess and the moral abandon of the 60s was what was promoted to actually neutralize the anti-war movements and to turn the counterculture into something that was weaponized.
It seems to have worked pretty well since we've been involved in one undeclared war after another, starting with the Vietnam era. Well, really, even Korea. That was a police action. Now they call it the Korean War. They don't call it the Korean police action. Never seen that on the title of anybody's book. So just in general terms, my sense of things is that people have pretty much turned away from everything except a compartmentalized life that somehow smears into other compartmentalized lives. In other words, it's sort of like the hippie effect. Everybody was trying to be an individual, but it's like, say, all of these people have got long hair, and they've all got patchouli oil on. They're all wearing Peter Fonda-style flowered shirts, the little tiny flowers. And it's like, say, you're an individual. You're special, unique, just like everybody else. I mean, is that what's happened?
That's a great point. One of the odd things about that whole ideology is that you can manage things by dialectics. And I think we touched on dialectics last time, but this is just simply the notion of two opposing sides or forces can be controlled. We all, I'm sure, in alternative circles might have heard of this term of problem, reaction, solution, or the Hegelian dialectic and synthesis and all that. And that's absolutely true. It's not exactly what Hegel taught, but this basic principle is accurate. And so what we have with the 60s counterculture and the idea that you can become a radical, atomistic individual who defines his own meaning, his own morals, what I mentioned earlier, subjectivism, that is ironically the dialectical opposite of the collectivism that we now see so prominent. And this is what all these big Royal Society thinkers and Aldous Huxley and so forth talked about in Brave New World, is that they would take people out of the previous stages of revolution all the way back to the French Revolution. Huxley says, you've got these successive revolutions. And he says, I'm going to show you that you can actually take a person who wants to be a radical individual, and we're going to blend that into the giant blob of the collective. And so you're absolutely right that groundless, meaningless individualism, ironically, just morphs back into total collectivism. And that's been the Fabian socialist model all along, is that you can take people, socially engineer them, and turn them into the mindless iPhone drones of the state. So the bubble of our iPhones and our iPods and the visual synthetic screens that we all watch all day, that's exactly, I believe, a social engineering Pentagon strategy technique for turning us into collectivized zombies rather than liberating us. I mean, I'm not being overly simplistic. Obviously, there's a lot of good stuff on the internet. There's a lot of ways that people can wake up and so forth, but it definitely has the effect for most people, I think, of plugging them into the matrix and so forth, and the things that we've talked about so many times in the past.
This may be a little on the simplistic side, but what do these people want, really? We go back into, you go back to your philosophy books. and all the old Greek philosophers, and then the ones that came after, even Will Durant and people like that, and it's the quest to find what makes a good life. It seems like people can find. I mean, there's perversion everywhere, and I remember being on this somewhere out. I believe it was in Eastland, Texas, looking at some property out there decades ago, and I found this ridiculous the remnants of some sort of a publication there about somebody who had some guy. It was a big confessional about how he wanted his wife to say that she hated her mother, apparently, and he eventually kills her. And I'm reading this. I'm going, what the hell is this? So I'm reading this, and so every day now that he's realized his abandoned now demonic nature, he kisses the stain of the blood on the floor every day and prays and this and that and the other. I'm going, this is like twisted out of all proportion, any proportion whatsoever. And I'm going, okay. So I began to think any little group, any little tribe can go the way of perversion and destruction and so forth. That whole, the duality of man or whatever, the Jungian thing, as Private Joker said. The thing is, do you believe that people will sort of naturally get along and things will function normally, and that these outside governmental forces are the ones that are ginning everything up? It seems to me that, there are exceptions to everything, but take the black-white issue here in this country. It seems to me that without these external agitators, black people and white people seem to get along pretty well. I don't see masses of black people attacking masses of white people and masses of white people attacking masses of black people. I see them sitting around together and talking and all that stuff. And you got the criminal element everywhere. If you get the skinheads and a few Black Lives Matter guys together, then you're probably going to have a problem. But I'm just saying generally, we get along. So is this just in my imagination, or, do I need to get out more or what? Because it looks to me like everybody's getting along fine until these wankers from government and these other organizations get in there and start screwing around and ginning people up. And then before long, you've got a problem. And then, here comes the press, and they make it bigger. And before long, it's a thing. And you would think that the whole country is burning down. Who's doing this, and why do they do it? Out of chaos, order. What? Great little catchphrase. I like it. Very interesting. I think it's totally bogus, frankly.
Yeah, that's that dialectical manipulation that we talked about. And when you talk about, you said out of chaos, order, that's that higher level Scottish Rite Freemason philosophy that you can manage both the right wing side or the left wing side through dialectics. And so to speak of this in application, we need to look no further than the recent race riots that you've talked about, or so-called race riots, which are really created in the media. That's my view, is that there's not so much of this on the ground as there is a large portion that's really just created by the Pentagon and its think tanks and the large CBS, NBC, and all these outlets, which actually have their origins in the post-war Cold War era, right? So actually William Paley, Sarnoff, these are all OSS people who then go into mass media, CBS and so forth. Rockefeller, the RKO, at one time had ownership of two of the big conglomerates. So you're talking about the shadow background people who understand these principles, and will even talk about it at times. For example, Zbigniew Brzezinski writes about controlling Manichaean dialectics in his books openly. So he talks about it in CFR lectures. So this is not a foreign notion. It's a real strategy. It goes all the way back to Caesar and his wars with the Gallicans and so forth. So you have these British intelligence agents like William Stevenson and so forth, who were involved in aiding Bill Donovan in setting up this nascent OSS organization. And what does Bill Donovan do with this? Well, he goes and he actually funds a lot of Maoist communist movements, right? So the network of spies that's set up in China, for example, which happens to magically match up to old drug networks where opium would be trafficked. Bill Donovan is involved in funding and training all of these communist guerrillas. And so when we think about the Cold War, we can't separate that from this older pattern. It goes back decades, millennia, right, to funding your opposition to control them. And so it's no different up into the Cold War, where I mentioned earlier the Hollywood 10, right? The the HUAC investigations in the 50s of the red infiltrators in Hollywood. If you watch that recent Coen Brothers movie, Hail Caesar, they actually do a period piece that's satirizing this. And I think it doesn't have the best ending, but it's a great example of how this was really something cooked up by Hollywood. Now, I've done lectures on Carroll Quigley's Tragedy and Hope. In the later 800 pages section, Quigley's got hilarious admissions about how from the 1945 to 50 period, most of the spy stories, the atomic spy stories of Nazis and Soviets, was complete Hollywood BS. The FBI, in tandem with Hollywood, actually made up a lot of these stories. They weren't real stories. There was only two of them, one of them being Klaus Fuchs, that had any semblance of reality to it. Now, why do I say all that about Cold War stuff? Well, I'm saying that this dialectics principle goes way back. Now, we look into the 60s. I've done some recent pieces on Manson. And what did Manson talk about? Helter-skelter race war. Now, when we understand the background of who was probably very likely involved in running or handling Manson, as himself a kind of handler for the killers, what we've got is, the shadow state, the intelligence agencies, and cults all working in tandem, Scientology, the Process Church of the Final Judgment. And this leads to this big psyop of, oh, now we live in this postmodern, again, return to primitivism, this return to the shaman, the druggie living out in the wilderness, right, who functions as this new priest class that can command hordes of youngsters to go out and commit murders. Well, most of that is just a media-created psyop, and it's no different with what they do now with the racial issues. And so you've got this, what it used to be progressive or leftist or whatever, has now morphed into this totally tyrannical, top-down, no allowance for any thought, right? It's supposed to be about tolerance. It's supposed to be about respecting others' opinions or whatever, and it's actually morphed into a total tyranny of radical progressivism that has to have the conflict, right? If they don't have the conflict, which most of which is created in the media, the racial dialectics, the gender dialectics, the East versus West dialectics, then there's no justification for all of their bloated bureaucracies and programs if they don't have the demonization and the enemy. So it's ironic because the whole thing supposedly exists under the guise of freedom, tolerance, liberalism, so forth, but it actually morphs into a total tyranny, much like the individualism morphs into the collectivism, and it just becomes this giant juggernaut monster that has become so insane and so preposterous that there's 60 genders in Germany. Germany officially, their government says there's 60 genders. So it's not just something in the U.S., it's global. And again, all we have to do is look at the background of where these groups, these radical fringe weird groups, where do they get their money? Well, it's almost always these State Department, Soros, Rockefeller Foundation groups. I mentioned the OSS earlier. The Frankfurt School, these radical Marxists, these Eastern Bloc Marxists, who in the post-war period were brought over to the U.S. to fill up the academies and the universities to teach our budding young minds. All these Frankfurt School freaks were aided by the OSS and the CIA and the Rockefeller Foundation. So the people that we think are our good guys, America and the West and all this, they've been run by the bad guys for a long time. And the bad guys are interested in toxic culture, destroying the family. Some of these Frankfurt School guys, you look at Wilhelm Reich, you look at, now he wasn't directly necessarily related to this, but he's part of this same program of Western destabilization and destruction. Freud said the family had to be destroyed because it's the origin of fascism. And where does fascism come from? Well, according to these fruitcakes, it comes from having a mom and a dad. So you got to destroy the father archetype so that you can have this listless, mindless zombie millennialist, the millennials, right, population, represented in the Neon Demon film by Jesse, played by Elle Fanning, who can then just be corralled into whatever you want. So that's what it's all about. It's about controlling these people, turn them into the drones, and then, down the line, it's about mass depopulation. Absolutely.
Mass depopulation. Well, the thing I've said until everybody's probably tired of it, the thing about 90% of the casualties in a world war, any war really, are civilian because the civilians allow it. I read an article over the weekend that the cancer rates in the last 16 years in the UK among children have gone up 40%. 40%. Public television was running this thing. I don't look at it much. But when I was looking at British comedies, and this thing would pop up, and it'd be like I don't know, some like 2-minute thing, all about cancer. 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women will get cancer. You know, I saw this this gal. You know, she's been proven to be wrong on a couple of things, but and she'll say one product is not so good. I mean, these are the reports. One product is not good, but then she kind of promotes another product which is also not that good. So anybody's liable to make a mistake, as Mo Howard said frequently in Three Stooges episodes. But this thing was about McDonald's. This thing that she did an article, an analysis that the chemicals inside the processed food here in the States are not permitted in the UK at all.
Right.
So I don't understand why people are not. Why are people eating that stuff? Look, I'm really, as these things go, not that old, but I can tell you that so many of the guys that I knew from the high school days and after, these guys have just died. They weren't that old. Too many trips to the fast food joint. Too much soda pop. Too much middle of the night going down to the ghetto grocery store and buying a big cotton candy and eating the whole damn thing at 2 o'clock in the morning, stuff like that. And they just bleeping died. And I'm wondering, what's wrong with everybody? Oh, I don't really think Fukushima's a problem. Really? Nah, I really don't think fast food's a problem. Okay. Well, I know the radiation is coming off these phones and all this stuff that we use, but nah, it won't really bother me. It's like, well, yeah, it will. Like this guy from Uruguay told me one time, you may not want to take care of yourself, but you reach a point in your life where you had better take care of yourself or you will simply die early. So the question is, what's wrong with the general public? Do they have to be led by the media? Do they have to be led? This country has more problems, more fat people. We are number 1 in the world for obesity, second only to, not even second. Mexico is second. We just keep doing it. You go to these various restaurants, like everybody in there is 300 pounds. And I'm just wondering, is it really poor leadership or really good leadership as far as the leadership technique is concerned? And the purpose of the leadership is to lead people into the grave early. Because if that's what their purpose is, then it's excellent leadership, if that is the objective. I mean, what's going on here, Jay? And let me phrase this as diplomatically as possible. What the hell is the matter with everybody? They see all the evidence out there that something's wrong, and they just sit there looking at it and then accusing whoever brings it to their attention of being a conspiracy theorist. There, I'll shut up now. You go.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you know the answer to all that, and that would just be the fact that the things that we're talking about with Hollywood doesn't just apply to Hollywood. It applies to the fashion industry, to education, to mass media, all the branches of the octopus, the legs of the octopus. They all promote the same toxic, weaponized things, and that would include food as well. And we all know, I think, hopefully by now in our circles at least, that the mass food business, big food, is controlled by 6 major corporations, and those 6 major corporations are probably owned by, a handful of families that have the controlling shares in those corporations. So that's how you have such continuity and unanimity across these different fields, is that it's always the same people in the background, because they just have unimaginable wealth that they've created out of nowhere through fiat dollars. And Carol Quigley talks about that in the first few chapters of Tragedy and Hope. So the reason that people are so willing to go along with this is that our scientific establishment, which they're scientistic, actually, there's the religion of scientism, they have so studied human nature and human psychology and sociology that they have it down to a precise technique. And a lot of this comes out of psychological operations and psychological warfare, where you study through warfare and through psyops how to manipulate groups of people. Ethnography is like the CIA does, right? So once you kind of have the profile of how these people operate, what their culture is, how they think, how they talk, you can create the necessary propaganda to nudge them, shift them. Right? Cass Sunstein talks about nudging people in different directions out of conspiracy theories and so forth into the official government line. And they become very adept at that. And the films, like I'm talking about, the fashion industry, that is a big part of how people are given a worldview. They're given the lens by which they interpret the world. And a big part of that is the fact that, again, the food industry is run by the same monopolistic capitalists, right? So we're not talking about a real free market here. We're talking about monopoly capitalism, Standard Oil, Rockefellers, Carnegie, so forth, Rothschilds. And what they're able to do is have a unified agenda across the spectrum, and they utilize the research of the scientists that I mentioned earlier. For example, I did a piece about a year ago called the ghost in the machine and mass mind control. And this goes back to one of these Royal Society figures, Arthur Koestler, who wrote a book called The Ghost in the Machine. It's a famous book about how the mind can be programmed because we just view the body or the human person like basically a biological robot. And just as you might program a computer, you could program a human based on operant conditioning, Pavlov, Skinner, all that kind of stuff through environmental stimuli. But what's interesting is that the CIA in the late 60s held a conference put on by Radio Free America that was called the Mind Control Symposium. Dr. Holger Hayden, as well as other scientists, neuroscientists, as well as Arthur Koestler and others attended this seminar, and they talked about the techniques that ranged from mass media all the way over to human engineering, bioengineering that could be used to alter the human person himself. So all the way into our DNA and RNA. And I'm not making this up. People find this hard to believe, but I've got it all linked in the article. You can go to the American Psychological Association pieces about this meeting and these doctors and these scientists, and they were openly discussing in the 60s how through toxic environment, toxic chemicals, BPA and so forth, that you could actually alter the human genome, and that this would turn us into something more malleable, right? These sort of gender neutral its that walk around. That's the final result of the things that these scientists talked about. And I have to give some credit to Alan Watt, who turned me on to that. But yeah, it's all real, and it's as hard as it is to believe. I mean, we see the very things that all of these conspiracy theories posit. We see it before our very eyes. I mean, who could have imagined that 20 years ago, suddenly transgenderism and all of these new genders would be everywhere, and it would be this hot button issue that we've got to talk about. Well, number one, this is like a minuscule percentage of the population. Why are we being forced to talk about 0.0001% of the population's obsessions and fetishes? I mean, that alone shows the amount of coordination and control that what I call the Atlanticist establishment, which would basically be the Western power bloc, that it has over our media. I mean, and that's the role of the CFR, the institution created by the Rockefellers, right? And I mean, they have a huge, huge role in controlling what the media reports in the West. And so you can't trust any of that, but most people are not interested in questioning that. They have cognitive dissonance. They don't want to consider the possibility that they've been wrong, and that because the domino would cause the whole thing to fall, right? It would mean that, oh, wait a minute, maybe I don't live the American dream. Maybe I'm actually being scammed and I may not get my pension. Maybe the cancer normalization of cancer is actually a big racket that preys on me like a vulture. Which I believe the medical system does. Right? Again, back to the Rockefellers. They're the fathers of the modern American medical system. So across the board, it would mean that all the dominoes fall apart, and everything that people have believed in, and they put their hope in, and that they've spent decades working, that maybe they probably got $100,000 in school loans when they went to become a doctor or whatever. Especially that professional class. They're some of the most invested into the system and brainwash people because of all the energy and effort that they put into it, and they derive a living from these things. So that's why people don't want the cost is too much to admit what's true.
CIA, according to Jim Clemente, is you know Jim, the FBI profiler. He works on Criminal Minds as a writer and producer. Mm-hmm. He said everything they do is illegal. whether it's domestically, which they can't operate here without FBI coming around to clean up their messes. Those are my words. Or overseas. So I'm thinking, okay. So basically, we have an intelligence service that does whatever it wants, and it's whatever it feels like it needs to do, and whether it's legal or not, that it operates completely outside the law because everything it does is illegal. That's great. Now, we know that, let's do a little geopolitics. Let's do some more geopolitics. Stories are coming out now that there's massive buildup of Russian stuff, hardware and people, for a big invasion of Ukraine. Simultaneously, you've written a piece on Turkey's shift toward Russia, which I thought was really interesting. This one, the Grand Chessboard, Turkey's shift toward Russia and the Grand Chessboard. And you write here, this is from the 28th of July, everybody. As with so many CIA-backed leaders, tyrants, and despots, once your usefulness to Washington and Langley expires or your policies go off script, a coup or regime change magically emerges. So, how close are we to World War III, you think? I know your crystal ball is probably in the shop. Mine's been there for years. But what do you think? A lot of people are saying that, I mean, you got Duterte down in the Philippines calling Obama, you son of a whore. Okay, and you've got Vlad Putin looking at him like, I would like to press my thumbs into your windpipe until there is no more wind for you ever. And he just looks at him like, I would like to kill you. I could kill you. I'm ex-KGB. I will kill if I get a chance. What, I mean, seriously, you just have to look at his eyes. He's going, oh, man, I'd like to throw this guy in the weeds. And Obama's like, hey, I get the feeling that Vlad would like to kill me. Are we close?
Well, in my opinion, no. And the reason I say that is because there's too much at stake in the Fortune 100 and the Fortune 500 in all their various interests globally to risk a giant, global war. I think what they're much more content with doing is, in the West, they're much more content with the soft kill Fabian model of gradual social engineering that we've been talking about up till now. But I think in other countries, the mode of operation for foreign policy, if you want to call it that, which is actually just psychological operations, is much more hardcore. So I think that if you look at Syria in 2011, Syria was experiencing the phenomena of the color revolution, which is tied to this Arab Spring. And we need to look no further than this professor by the name of Gene Sharp out of the U.S., who is the father of crafting, branding, and creating a coup or a color revolution or a regime change through so-called democratic means. Now, when they talk about democracy, that's the propaganda. What they actually mean is, once we get the leader out of power and we put our puppet guy in comes Coke, in comes Pepsi, in comes LGBTQ 60 genders, in comes vaccines, in comes abortion, in comes the Rockefeller education institutions and so forth that are going to teach your women feminism. So that's what democracy really means in all these other countries. And that's not to say that the leaders of these countries, they might be total dictator tyrants, right? But the problem is that what you're going to get is not really democracy. You're going to get something much worse. And so the reason I don't think that there's going to be a World War III is that it's more so Russia is on the defensive here because of the NATO expansion and encroachments. I mean, it's NATO through Turkey that has been funding and aiding ISIS in Syria and all the disastrous attacks on Syria that we've seen in the last few years. And, you can go on YouTube and YouTube will yank everything, but they won't yank the al-Nusra and the jihadis and their bomb videos that go up everywhere. I watched hours of them. But you can look at the Ukraine, and it was a very similar situation. You have a pro-Russian guy. Ukraine is not a nationalist state. It's a state that was created out of World War I.